Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Hall. You're watching The Late Show. With me, as always, is Satanist par excellence extraordinaire, Jack Matirko.
Hey, it's been busy.
It's been busy.
Busy time for Satan. Lots going on.
Excellent. Hemant Mehta is our guest. He is a blogger, podcaster, author, YouTuber. Man, and you know, I'm going to tell you right now, I have microphone envy. That's what I have.
It's very big and bulky. This is the
blue snowball.
It's a blue snowball. It's a pandemic mic. Otherwise, I actually have a decent one that would not be so obtrusive in the screen. But for now, it's the closest we'll get to something decent.
Excellent. Well, you know, since we are in a pandemic, I believe it's my duty to ask you how you and yours are doing.
We're safe. We're healthy. You know what I mean? It's all good. I've been able to get my shots because I coach at a local high school, so I'm staff, so that technically counts for something. And now we're just kind of waiting for everyone else. But no, we've been okay. I'm excited for the summer to like go out places and travel and maybe take a road trip or two. So we're just in a holding pattern like everybody else, but it could be so much worse. So it's like, what am I going to complain about?
Right. So, you know, I have to tell you, Hemant, this is actually a wellness check with you. After that 2.5 hour video you made, how many people did God kill in the Bible? I have no idea how long it took you.
I've been working on that one since September.
And, you know, if anyone who's watching this hasn't seen it, it is epic. Timestamps, Hemant. Timestamps for every single incident. Oh, my fictitious God.
You know what? It's one video that I made where I also do a thing where I go through the different books of the Bible, at least in Genesis and Exodus and stuff. And it's like, as someone who writes every day about current event stuff for my blog, that stuff has an expiration date of like 2 minutes from after I post it, right? So with the YouTube stuff, it's very much, I'm hoping this will still be useful a month, a year from now. In a way that all my blog posts will totally not be. And so at least with this one, because I put effort into it, I have no idea if anyone will actually watch it. You never know with any of this stuff, what works and what doesn't. But it's like, all right, if I'm going to do something like that, let me try to do it right as far as I can. And let me try to make the timestamps work. And let me try to, you know what, if it goes 2.5 hours, I'm not going to split this thing up. Let's just put it all out there. Let's see if it works. And if it does, cool. And if it doesn't, it's like, all right, I'm not going to do that again. At least for I was thinking with the Genesis and Exodus, I split it up chapter by chapter as opposed to doing it all at once. And that one works. But at least with the God killings, it's like, you know what? I know it's long, but screw it. If you want to watch this thing, jump around to where you want to see it, watch the whole thing. I mean, the whole point is, yeah, it's a long video. God kills a lot of people in the Bible. It's going to be long.
God kills a lot of people. I believe the official verified kills are north of 2.5 million.
Something like that, yeah.
And the estimated closing in or north of 25 million. And
yeah.
So how long did it take you to do? How long did it take you to film that?
I contacted Steve Wells, who wrote a book called Drunk with Blood, where he actually did this blog series more than a decade ago, where he just slowly went death by death. And he kind of said, this is what happened. Here's the Bible verse or two that explains where I'm getting this from. And people would, in the comment threads, they might add some points of clarification. So he would update the things. And someone might say like, hey, you missed one over here in this chapter. So he would go back, insert it back in. And this took a few years for him to do. He's also the author of Skeptic's Annotated Bible, if you've ever seen that website. Brilliant. So after he finished it, he put together Drunk with Blood, which was more or less a collection of those blog posts. So I reached out to Steve and I was like, I want to make a video on this. I think I literally said in the email, because we've talked before, he knows me. I'm like, I want to make a video. It's mostly me analyzing it, but I am using your data and the way you analyze this. Do I have your permission? One. And two, I think I said, I think it'll just be a 20-minute video where I list kind of the things. So that's kind of what I think. And they're like, yeah, go for it. Have fun. And so that was nice. And so this isn't like one thing I worked on for 6 months, but I started writing it up piece by piece as I could. And with me, it's like, okay, I wrote it. Now let me go back and check it because I got to. But by the time it was January or February and I had a script, I'm like, okay, I'll film it. Thankfully, because it's just long cuts, there's not a lot of editing. It's just stop and start, say the thing. That wasn't the worst part. What was hard is getting the graphics with the numbers to show up, because that's not my forte. But by the time it went up, I think Steve appreciated it. Steve liked it. Steve's son, who works with them, liked it. So it's like, okay, good. They're happy with it. I felt okay with it. And honestly, I have no idea what the reception is. I see some of the comments, but you know how like anyone who comments ever is like 1% of the actual reaction. Exactly. So it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I've had videos that are more popular that are not 2.5 hours long, but hopefully, again, I feel like that's a resource that'll be useful for people a while from now. And if anyone wants to know those stories or they want to check out that stuff, cool. What I like about Steve's book is that with all the numbers, he might say, God committed a genocide in this city. So we'll just go with an estimate of 1,000 deaths since the Bible doesn't specify. And with all this stuff, you can totally argue that it should be more or less or anything. But what Steve tries to do is to say, well, we know for a fact at least one person died. So we'll just say one, even though I think it's more like 1,000. But that's kind of where he has two different sets of numbers going. But it's a fascinating thought experiment, and one that, or more importantly, I did not see on YouTube in a way that I liked. So it's like, all right, I am not reinventing the wheel here. I am doing something I haven't seen yet. I feel like that's worthwhile. There are a lot of YouTube creators who do a lot of really interesting things with content. And sometimes you might say, and this is with blogging too, it's like, I don't want to just copy what they're doing. Otherwise, I'll just tell people to go see other people. Yeah. But is there a topic I can add something to that no one else that I see happens to be doing? Then that might make for a fun topic. So anyway, that's where that video came from. If anyone has 2.5 hours to kill, or 1 hour 15 if you go on double speed.
Right. Well, once again, with all the time
stamps. It's all time stamped. Yeah. Go find the Bible verse that you want to.
Yeah. Go see the killing of 1 million Ethiopians if you feel like it. Yeah, exactly. I actually had so many timestamps in there. I was trying to get in. There's a 5,000 character limit in the YouTube description. And so I had to shorten everything to like 1 or 2 words. But by the end of it, they said, basically, you have so many timestamps, it won't put it in the video itself. If I only had like 20 of them or whatever the number is, then they would actually put it so you could click on it in the video. But there were too many. Oh well.
Oh, you mean like the little hash marks on the timeline? Yeah, there's just too many of them.
There's too many to do.
You remember that graphic? There was that graphic that was going around for a while that had the entire Bible on a timeline, and there were just red lines for every time there was something that didn't match up.
Yep.
Same kind of.
That website sadly went down. It's very sad. BIBVIZ, BibViz, Bible Visual. But BibViz, and it was an awesome resource because it tracked all those contradictions and stuff. Yeah. And then the owner of the site, like, I think the domain expired and he's gone radio silent.
No,
very sad.
I just want to tease people with this. You do sing a little bit, just a little bit, a few bars.
That's right. I even say in there, like, there's a segment in there about Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, which is a famous story in the Bible. And I'm like, the one thing anyone knows about that story, if you don't know the Bible details, is you sing a song about it. If you go to Sunday school or if you're growing up in church, you probably have sang that song at some point. So I think I tried to sing it for like 2 seconds, and then I'm like, trust me, you don't want to hear this. Just, you know what I mean. All right, let's get to the story.
So, Hemant, the last time we talked was back in 2018, which was an eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was an eternity ago. I think we dropped the episode the day before Christmas in 2018.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, forever ago.
Forever ago. So So this, and we could just do the whole hour-long conversation on this. But has the Trump presidency, now that we're post-Trump, has the Trump presidency really altered your view on what kind of country we're living in? And has that altered your strategy on how you go about your business?
Yeah, a couple things have happened. One is I think before he came into office, because I've been involved in the world of like atheist activism for a while, I knew it was dangerous to have like conservative Christians in power because they will legislate that way. So the fact that Trump did that, not because Trump cares, but because he's surrounded by people who care about that stuff, none of that surprised me. But what Trump really did is it made people who are not us involved in this sort of community aware of what happens when like conservative Christians really take over. And now you're seeing some of it with the conspiracy theories and the Capitol riots and stuff where it's like, no, religion and politics and conservative religion, Christianity and politics is really intertwined in a way that is potentially dangerous for all of us. I think it goes beyond just our circles. So that's one thing that happened during the Trump administration that I had not seen with the Bush administration so much, which is that the things I'm concerned about, other people are finally concerned about. And that's good. There's awareness in that sense. That's one thing. The other thing I saw, this has actually made me happy to see in the past few years, because I didn't see this during Bush or Obama, is that when there are church-state separation problems, it used to be that atheist groups, church-state separation groups, what have you, would kind of go at it alone. We would try to file lawsuits, or we would write letters to the people who need to hear about it. And with the Trump administration, what you see is that, and by the way, you're seeing it now too with Biden, with whatever issues there are. But when there are, like, let's say, briefs to the Supreme Court, it's not signed by like Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and now we're done. It's not. It's signed by like those groups and a whole slew of progressive religious groups. And you know what I mean? Like all these, there's a Baptist, I'm forgetting the name. There's a Baptist group that does church-state separation work. There's so many progressive Christian groups, and you see a lot more alliances. You see a lot more letters signed by all of those groups. You see interfaith organizations that are willing to say, oh yeah, atheists, come on board with us when we are doing these issues, because we all care about these same things that go beyond our differences between each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that sort of cooperation that shows it's not just about us. It's not about my views. The fact that we disagree about God, we're setting that aside because we all believe in church-state separation. That cooperation wasn't there before, but during the Trump administration, I started seeing a lot more of it. These are not one-off events anymore. It's regular. There are very few things that involve the government and those types of issues where atheists are going at it alone. Maybe some lawsuits here and there, but by and large, if there's like the Department of Education or Homeland Security does something that affects religion, or they let in more conservative Christian immigrants than refugees than they do other people, you have a whole group of people who are saying you can't privilege one religion like that. And so I appreciate that cooperation. I mean, that's going to keep happening moving forward. And I will say, even the Biden administration, when they were campaigning, they specifically reached out to a humanist group and said, put together a group of people so that we are in touch with your community. Now, how much of that is lip service? How much of that translates into action? Fair question, different story. But the fact that they didn't just see us as poison, they said, look, we want to reach out to you. We don't have a church we can go to. There's no atheist pope to talk to get in touch with all of you. But can you put together a coalition of humanists who are willing to say you support Joe Biden for any number of reasons? And we had a direct line to their campaign staff who joined us on weekly calls, who heard our concerns and could take them to the administration. Like that's something that didn't happen during the Obama administration. Right. Those are steps in the right direction. Again, I want to see action, but I don't want to discount the symbolism of that either. So that's a long way of answering your question.
It sounds like a lot of groups were scared straight.
Which groups?
Well, it sounds like some of the other groups that wouldn't be joining us in these church-state separation, arguments in front of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
They were scared straight by Christian fascists. That's my word. You don't have to accept that word. Nationalism, redundant. And they're like, wow, we have to really join together.
It's amazing that so many of those progressive Christian groups are probably more closely aligned with all of us in values than they are with the right-wing, like white evangelical groups. And so, the problem they are concerned about, whether it's like LGBTQ bigotry or whatever it is, like they can't rely on their Christian teammates, so to speak, to fix that because they're part of the problem. But they're willing to team up with progressive Muslim groups, with atheist groups, because we are all saying, look, we're not asking for the government to endorse us. We're not asking for advertisements or promotions. We're saying back out. Like, let us deal with our issues, but we need you to step out of it and not play favorites and not promote one religion over another. And we're all saying that together. And I think that definitely carries a lot more heft than like a letter signed by 500 evangelical pastors who all say the same thing. Like when you have versus, 500 people from a variety of religious groups all saying the same thing. I mean, that matters.
Yeah. In your opinion, how close were we to the edge as a country?
We're still so close. I mean, it's scary. I don't know if this answers the question. So in 2008, because I live close to Chicago and Barack Obama, hometown guy, when he was running in 2008, the night of the election, I was able to be in Grant Park where they had, if you go to YouTube and type in like Grant Park election night and stuff, there's all these amazing videos. They will make you cry. What was so weird about that is coming after 8 years of George W. Bush. At the time, everyone, if in liberal circles, would be like, worst president ever. And to go from that to Obama, and when they announced that he was the winner, what was so weird about that is I was walking home that night, like walking to my car, which was parked miles and miles away from that venue. You would have thought it would have been celebration everywhere, right? Like, but it wasn't. Everyone was so relieved that like it was silent walking down the streets. Everyone was in disbelief that actually happened. And it was like, wow, this is what we've been working for so long. And I know the pandemic played a role when Biden won this time around and it was a little delayed, but almost the same thing happened where it's like, do I feel excited? I feel more relieved.
I think the thing with this is since, particularly because Georgia got stretched out so long,
right?
Where, everybody wanted to feel that relief and then it just dragged on and you were just like, oh,
yeah. But now, to this week being one of the weeks where you see that come to fruition, what Biden's victory meant, what having 2 Georgia senators meant, it's like, wow, okay, that's a good step that has to happen. And the question now, we can focus on like, what can we actually do instead of playing defense for years? You know what I mean? Yeah. And that switch is, I know there are obstacles along the way, but like, I just feel like relief. I feel like there's possibility. And so that makes me excited in terms of like, we can actually get some stuff done. And that actually makes it easier to sell to people. Like, this is the vision we want to see. It's not everything. I'm way more left than Joe Biden is, but it's like, holy crap, we actually got something done that will help people. That's important for people to see. And I remember like with the Obamacare stuff, yeah, that was a huge step and it wasn't what any progressive person wanted. But it's like, once you see it, you're not going to want to get rid of this. Like, we know the impact it'll have. I think, and I'm glad to see they learned their lesson this time around with like not compromising and watering down a bill to the point where it's not helpful at all. Yeah. So I'm excited. Your question was like, how close are we to the brink? I'm scared to think of what would have happened had Trump won again. And it was, I don't think people realize how close it was to happening. Closer now than it was like 4 years ago, where it was like a small number of votes in a small number of states. Like, it's scary close how close we were this time around. And like, what would have happened then? Can you imagine another 4 years of doing all that shit again that we've been dealing with for 4 years, where it's just constant, how do we mitigate this disaster every day? You know, I had a weekend where you know what I've been doing? When it's nice out, I've been going out on walks near where I live, and I just have all these articles that I want to read that are not like, I don't need to read it today. It's like, it's a long article somewhere. I can go. I'm not worried about having to respond to anything. I don't have to like think about it. I can just zone out. I can do stuff.
Have you had a thing since the election where you went back and you were looking at stories between 2016 and 2020 and say, how the fuck did I miss that one? Because it was like there was just some huge altering the landscape story that just completely got missed because Trump was sucking all the air out of the room.
Right. I have a child here who wants to say hello to everyone.
Oh, hey, that's great.
Hey, kiddo.
Oh my God, there were so many stories that were sucked in. I pick and choose what I'm writing about, so I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what I missed. But there were definitely things that I haven't read a book in friggin' years because that requires an amount of time and concentration that I could not give because there would always be stuff that I needed to get to. And so that was a big deal. I'm going to mute myself for a second and get these things out of here. Give me one moment.
Well, I think that is one of the weird things is and I'm sure you've seen this on your blog too, Andy. I'm sure where like you wrote a post and you felt good about it. You're like, this one's going to get some traction, and then 3 minutes later he tweeted something, and you're like, well, there goes my day. You know?
Well,
I agree.
Yeah. Especially during comedy where you're trying to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of the news cycle, and then all of a sudden the thing that you just wrote just got blown out of the water by something even more absurd that just happened.
Right.
You know,
it is a question I've been asking myself that I couldn't ask for a while now, which is there any? I mean, the God video is one example of it, where it's like, is there some long-term project that won't go stale, that I won't get bored by, that I will be able to finish because I won't get interrupted by some crazy shitstorm that like will take up a significant amount of time. That's something I have the luxury of trying to figure out now because of that.
Yeah, true enough. You know, this is an interesting way to pivot to my next question. Is that how do you see your role in the Godless community, and how has that changed over time?
It's a good question. I try not to think about any of that. I mean, I try to write about things that are going to be interesting to people on a national level, which means it's paying a lot more attention to politics than internal drama that like 3 people care about and no one else pays any attention to. Because again, you can always talk about drama happening within small circles because there's no subculture of any kind that doesn't have the same drama.
I have no idea what you're talking about, sir.
Like, you could talk about YouTube, you could talk about whatever, whether it's the world of comedy, you could talk about Satanism, whatever it is, there's always those conflicts going on. And again, the question, I've heard this from religion reporters too, and I'm not including myself in that batch, but what they say is like, I promise you no one cares about that story if I talk to them about it. And they're very blunt about that. And it's a legit point to make where it's like, oh, but this organization is totally dying right now. No one cares. No one has heard of them. No one is paying any attention to their internal struggles. So it's like, all right, well, then why am I fanning the flames of any of that? Like, I'll pick and choose if I write about organizations, drama, if I think it matters in the long run.
Yeah.
But so much stuff of the conflicts that I hear about because I'm friends with a lot of these people, it's like, no, I know it's a big deal on my Facebook feed, but literally no one else, if I talk to who doesn't follow this on a regular, no one cares. So I'm not going to waste my time trying to make it a thing. And this is true even of someone might say, my pastor did this, or my teacher, my kid's teacher did this thing. It's like, you don't have to raise everything up to 11. Like, try to take care of it internally if you can. Your pastor doing one thing may not be the biggest deal, but if someone does something that might actually stand in for a larger issue, that might be worth it. So, for example, there was a pastor a couple of weeks ago in Missouri who gave a sermon he basically gave a sermon like women should serve their men. They should be model wives for their men. That is a sermon that is pretty universal, and every evangelical who has gone to a church like that, they've all heard a version of that sermon. This guy was bad at it because he was just super blunt and he didn't use any of the right language. It's not, no. Men and women have different roles. So it's not that the woman has to do whatever the man wants. They have different but equal roles. Like, God loves them both. No, this guy was just like, women, what are you doing? Start looking like Melania. That was kind of the gist of his sermon. That's kind of like dude, this is what we've been trying to tell you. This is how it sounds all the time. Yeah. And that did go, like, people read that article. People wanted to hear about that story, not from me necessarily, but they wanted to hear that story because it's like, this is the worst example of something we've seen in so many different churches. And the comments that I've seen people make online is, I grew up with this stuff. This is why I left my church. Yeah. So those are stories like where I know it happened locally and no one would have known about it, but it's a bigger deal. Whereas two atheists in some group are fighting about something. Like, I personally, I'm totally into this. I'm very curious, but nobody else but me cares. You know what I mean?
Sure.
We might pay. So again, I try to think to myself, if people are reading anything I write, and I have that luxury, and I have done things where if I write things, I know it'll become a bigger deal. So I want to use that wisely. Like, I don't want to elevate shit that doesn't need to be elevated. But it's like, what's going on here that anyone cares about? A lot of times it's usually just personalities clashing. It's like, no one cares. That is not a news story. That's not unique to us. Whereas a story like a Me Too story that has happened in our community as well as the bigger culture, that's worthwhile. That's worth talking about. So anyway, that's kind of, do I get it wrong? Totally. But that's kind of where I'm trying to think about if I'm going to spend any time on a story.
How do you respond to atheists who say atheism has nothing to do with politics?
I mean, it strikes me silly. I mean, first of all, does Christianity have anything to do with politics too? Here's a version of that question that I've heard. Tell me if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying. It's like, why do atheists care so much about abortion rights, LGBTQ rights? Because the question of whether God exists doesn't necessarily go in that direction. Right. And the criticism I've heard is like, well, it's all social justice all the time or something like that. But it's like, well, why do you think Republicans right now are opposed to trans rights? Why are they opposed to abortion rights? I promise you religion plays a role in that. And so if we're just trying to keep it a secular government, and if you took religion out of the picture, they don't really have any good reason to oppose those measures. So to me, it's like, it's not that I think atheism has a role in the government. I don't want the government talking about it or spending much time on it, but I do want them making sure religious, faith-based ideas, like, no, you shouldn't be voting on something because only the faith community wants it or because the faith-based community says this is how we feel, so you should legislate it. Obviously, that would be a problem, I would think a lot of atheists recognize. So we need to stop that. And so that to me is why those topics in particular, any of those social issues, and we can even extend that when we talk about racism, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, when we talk about any of those social issues that the right-wing people will be like, it's a woke issue, it's a social justice issue. What do you think is separating these? What do you think is creating the separation or creating the racism? Because I have no shortage of content that shows how, like, Southern Baptists promote this sort of racism, and a lot of Black pastors, a lot of female Bible teachers, Beth Moore last week. Why are they leaving the Southern Baptists? Because it's super racist. Yeah. And of course, the people who are making those same arguments, like I always do this when it's a state senator or state legislator who is passing some bill that's against that stuff. I just assume they're religious, and then I look for the evidence of that. And it's like, what church do they go to? Like I'm gonna guess. I know what it is, but obviously I need the confirmation of that. And I'm never wrong on that one. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's not that atheists have to pay attention to politics. I know some atheists think it's a God thing, and then I'm done having that argument and stuff. But it's like, if you care about God not existing, I would think it's not a big leap to say, well, then I don't want God influencing how our government is run. I certainly don't want one interpretation of what God looks like deciding how government is run. So then you got to play some defense when it comes to that. So that's why, to me, politics seems like a natural extension of what I care about as an atheist. And it's not that every atheist has to agree on my politics, but like, it's not a big leap for me to say I care about gay rights or what have you, abortion rights, because I'm an atheist, because I see how religion influences that discussion, and always in a bad way. Not that there aren't progressive Christians and whatnot who are agree with me on this stuff, but like, you could see the damage. So to me, that's a natural extension, because once all of us and the people like watching this live stream, once you agree God doesn't exist, I don't need to have that debate with anyone. I don't need to be convinced. I haven't read a book trying to convince me God doesn't exist, because why? What am I doing with that book anymore? I'm good. I don't need that conversation anymore. So it's like, okay, well, where do I go from here? What's the natural extension of my activism now? I do want to make sure I want to help people as much as I can who are becoming atheists and need to navigate some of those obstacles. Sure, there's some groups doing that. They're awesome. But I want to actually see that into government. I want to see policies that reflect not my personal views necessarily, but just a church-state separation. Let's talk about the facts.
So I have to admit, my answer is Jane Austen, and the question is, which Jeopardy category do I suck the most at? I'm just going to be honest right here. Jane Austen.
It's going to be a tough one. That's pretty much all I knew. Is there's like some knee-jerk responses like this book, this author. As long as you can make that connection, that's all you got to know.
Right. And of course, I'm referencing to your stint on Jeopardy.
my long streak of one day.
One day. Hey, that's one day, brother. That's one day. That's right, two. You were there for 2 days. Yes. I mean, you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. The short version is I've been auditioning forever, and they never call back, because why would they call back? Why would anything nice ever happen? And a couple of years ago, they called and said, or they emailed and said, hey, you not passed. They just said your online test that everyone takes was good. Come to an in-person audition, which I'd never gotten before. So I drove up to Milwaukee one day, on a random weekday, drove up there, was in a room with like 50 other people or so, all of whom got that same email, went through that same process. And basically, after you do a mock game and another test, they kind of just tell you, okay, we've talked to all of you. We've seen how you do. Maybe we'll call you. We probably won't. And we can call you anytime between now and a year and a half from now. So, I wouldn't sit by your phone. Just maybe we'll call you. And so once I got back, I remember heading home thinking, I thought, I have no regrets about that. I thought it went fine. But like they said, they're probably not going to call. I remember watching some people do practice games, and I'm like, oh my God, not only are they smart, but their stories are really interesting. And when they talk, I'm like, oh my God, I could tell why that person would be really good. And you could also tell some people, I'm like, how did you get here? Like, I don't know. But I don't know. I didn't think they would call. And then several weeks later, like there was a call on my phone from Culver City, California. It's like, holy crap. I answered, and they basically just said, hey, we just need to like run some stuff by you. Like, have you been on the show before? I'm like, no. Have you been arrested? And they're like, can you come by on this day? And I don't know what day they said. I'm like, yes. And they were like, all right, we'll see you then. I'm like, the hell just happened? Really? What? Cool. And so they basically gave all of us 6 weeks to do whatever we wanted, study. So it was 6 weeks of cramming last winter. I flew out at the end of January before the pandemic. So thankfully and Alex was still around, so I got to get in right when he was still there. We taped 5 episodes a day. I was kind of hoping everyone would be. I was kind of hoping I would hate all the other contestants because it's like I really want to beat you, and it's so much easier if I hate you. And honestly, as someone who would totally be cynical and doesn't like anybody, because we're all in the same area. We all just went through the same experience where we all just had this fantasy come true. And we're all there, but like we can't all win. We all have someone's got to get destroyed, right? So we're all in this high stress environment. But you have to think, why did these people get asked to be on the show? Probably because they're interesting in some way. So there's a little quiet game of why are all of you here? And you find out, I talked to one guy who was like a political activist is not the right word, but he was an organizer in Ohio. And it's like, that guy seems awesome. Someone else was an opera singer. There was a screenwriter. It's just so cool. All these people coming from all these different areas who I never would have met otherwise because they're all so different and super nice, which again, it made it so hard because we're watching. It's like, I wouldn't be mad if you won. You're really nice people. And they just said, okay, well, we taped 5 episodes. They're like, the first game is going to be you, and you go get ready. I'm sorry, there was one returning person. So 2 of you and this return. That was the other thing. I was like, holy shit, we don't know who's returning that day. Is it going to be like Ken Jennings, who wins 1 million games in a row? And we're all just about to be sacrificed and we don't even know it. We had no idea who that was. And they're like, it's this person. Do you want to tell them how you're doing? And she says to us in the green room, I am a 1-day champion. I won $2,000. I'm sorry, she said I won 2. And we're all like, or I won 20. I forgot what she said. But we're like, oh, you won 20,000? No, 2,000. We're like, oh, that's really low. Something weird happened in your game. I don't know what it was. But we're like, okay, you're not a 1-million-day champion. We all have a chance.
You're doing the game theory in your head.
Yeah, I totally was. But yeah, we all, I wasn't playing in the Monday game that morning. So I just went to sit in the audience with a bunch of the other contestants. And we're all just sitting watching. And we're all quietly to ourselves, I'm glad I didn't get that category. It was Jane Austen. I'm glad that wasn't mine. It would have been really bad. I remember thinking I knew Final Jeopardy on Monday's show. I'm like, damn it. I wish I was playing this game. I would have done okay. Yeah. Then they said, all right, we're done with that show. They told the winner of that game, who was that Ohio political guy, go change your clothes. And next players are you and you. They just tell us. And it wasn't me. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'm sitting around. We do it all again. And this time I'm like, I did not know Final Jeopardy. And I didn't know some of those people. And also the one person who kind of intimidated me won. Oh man, I hope I don't have to play against her. And then they're like, Wednesday's game, Hemant, and one other person's like, damn it. So whatever, we played the game. I got lucky without going into too much detail. I got lucky in terms of she didn't know the final answer and I didn't know the final answer. Oh. And my wagering worked out, so I won the game. And so I got to come back, which is an hour later after lunch, to play again. Okay. And I lost that second game, but at that point, it's I don't even care. I did what I came to do, which is I won a game. It was an awesome experience. I got to take a picture with Alex. We don't really get to talk to him, but it was awesome. It was such a cool experience. The staff, they know what pressure you're under. They know this is everybody's dream come true. And also 2 of you are going to go home unhappy in every game. So it's it was such a neat experience. I'm glad I got to be a part of it. I'm glad I got to do it before the pandemic hit. So there was a studio audience, and I could do it the way it was meant to be played instead of any of these shortcuts they kind of have to take right now because of the situation. It was just, I'm glad I could do it. And by the way, I should say, because people may be interested, there was a category in that second game about books of the Bible. Which I was like, the first question I got beaten to by somebody else. I knew it and I got beaten to it. The next 3 I got right. And it was near the end of the game. And I'm like, I'm winning right now. I'm exactly where I want to be. And I'm really afraid. There's only a handful of clues left. And there's a daily double no one's gotten. And I'm so afraid that if I go for the $2,000 question, it's going to be the daily double. and I will have to risk everything. Like, I have to. It's a Bible book. It's me. Like, how could I be like, oh, I'm just going to bet 100, even though I do this for a living? Like,
this is an interesting no, here's an interesting point, because you're a math guy, went to school, got your degree in math, taught math. In that moment, when you're on stage, does your lower brainstem take control about how to wager or how to decide things, or does your math sense still dominate in your decision making?
The entire time the thing's going on, off screen, so no one on TV can see it. They have the running scores up there of all three of us, which helps if someone gets a daily double and they want to know what to wager. You'll see the contestants go like, and you're like, where are they looking? They're looking at the scores. But the whole time I'm like, I can't get the daily double on this, and I'm so afraid I'm going to get it. So I switched categories, and then time ran out. We never got to see, and no one saw the daily double. So I ended up going in with a lead, and I ended up losing because I didn't know that answer and someone else did. So I lost fair and square. It was all good. But now, in retrospect, I'm like, should have gone for it now. Because, like, had I lost, it would have been one hell of a way to go, even if I ended up with nothing. But it was, you know what? All of us second guess everything. I'm like,
oh, whatever. Yeah. That's it. That's interesting. So, this is the second time we've talked. And I'm curious. And if this is too personal, we just go to the next question. Why do you do this? Because there are you could be making a ton more money, right? You could be much more secure.
Could be.
And people who do this for different reasons. And if you feel comfortable with this, could you talk about why you do this? Yeah,
thanks, Mom. Honestly, there's very few things I think that I've ever felt so confident about as when I became an atheist, because no one pressured me into that. It's one of those things I feel like I figured out for myself. And once I figured it out, and I know a lot of atheists have had this same thing, it's like, I'm right about this and everyone else is wrong about it. And that's one thing. That's what got me into activism, because I'm like, I need to be around other people who feel the same way. And knowing, like, I think a lot of people, I know we've all talked to people who are interested in activism or writing or whatever it is we do. And the one thing they're like, what can I bring to the table? What can I contribute? And one thing that I found that, in addition to being an activist, one thing I could do is, if I was writing about something, I could get it some traction. And that was a long time ago when I began blogging about stuff. And when you've been doing it as long, I think I've been doing that since like 2006 or something. Yeah. Like now, if I can bring attention to a problem, it'll get heard by an audience wider than just atheists. And it's like, cool. Like, I know there are people itching for this information. They want to know how to, okay, there's some issue going on in politics, but like, what's an atheist perspective on this issue? And the truth is, there aren't a lot of places where you can go to just hear about a story from a point of view that is meaningful to you, but also hopefully makes sense. Like, you can go to your cable news channel of choice, but the most dichotomy you'll get there is like conservative and liberal. It's not really saying, here's why it affects you as an atheist. And again, for so many people, when that is such a big part of who they are, and it's a big part of your identity, the religion thing, it's like, it's the same reason a lot of pastors get swayed too. Because like, you don't just want to hear about how to live your life. You want to hear about how to live your life as a Christian and what that means for you moving forward. And again, I'm not telling anyone how to live their life, but it's like, okay, this story happened. And like, I'm not just writing it as some progressive who's mad at Republicans. I'm not focusing on every issue they're making a fuss about, but it's like, this matters because I'm an atheist. And I don't think there's a lot of places you can go for that content necessarily. And once I know people are reading this, I know it can make an impact in some cases, or at the very least, it can inform people so that they know what they're talking about. I mean, some of the posts are not just some idiot said this, but it's, here's a Supreme Court battle that is happening. There was one last week that got virtually no attention in the mainstream media because it's such a low stakes Supreme Court case. But it actually was surprising because you had conservative Christian groups and atheist groups all on the same side for once, which never happens in a church-state story. So trying to make sense of that and trying to explain what the problem was and all that, it's like, I feel like I'm not seeing that anywhere else because it's not a big deal of a case. So if I can explain it, that may be helpful to other people. If I can make a video trying to explain something because I haven't seen anyone do it, or I can explain a complicated situation in a way I am not seeing. Again, I don't know if anyone's getting help with it, but I've heard enough feedback that I know it's getting through to some people. And that does keep you going after a while. When people say, no, I've been reading this for a long while. I've never written to you or anything, but I've been reading your stuff for years. And it's like, good, cool. Like, that's awesome. If I can make my way into your system for a while and maybe plant a seed of some sort, because again, don't we all want everyone else in the world thinking the way we do about stuff? And if I can help.
That's terrifying to me personally.
That's a horrible idea.
Right, yeah.
That is terrifying, personally speaking.
But if I can help you think about this stuff as an atheist and get upset about the right things. And again, there are plenty of issues that are outside my wheelhouse. I don't really get into them, but it's like, no, these things should matter to you. And there's stuff, believe me, stuff I disagree with other atheists about too, which might be interesting. But in general, like the fact when you get enough feedback and if you have the luxury to be able to do it, like you said, because I've had this conversation with my family too. It's like, I could be doing something else now, but I really enjoy this. And I can make it work. And I know that's a luxury a lot of people who make content online don't have. So it's like, well, if I can keep making this work, then I'll keep doing it. If there comes a point where it's unsustainable, like I'll find something else to do. But as long as I can keep this going and people are supportive of it, hey, it's not a bad gig at all. It's a 24/7 gig, but it's not no complaints.
Do you think we were talking about how Trump changed the landscape and everything, and given how that administration exposed so much of the systemic problems that there are with church-state issues, and there are more people, do you feel that, because one of the things that I found with blogging in particular is it's very hard to write stuff that will both get people up to speed and maintain their attention span long enough. And since there's so much of that to cover now, how are you handling that situation?
I definitely try to keep it short and sweet. They're usually not long articles and stuff. There's a difference between I want to tell you what just happened, which maybe you haven't heard about yet. That's one type of post. Another one may be longer, but it's like I want to explain something that's going on. But honestly, those get very little feedback relative to someone said crazy stuff. So it's a balance. It's a mix of stuff, but it's sometimes, there's a difference in exposing religious actions or words that are like, are you all seeing how crazy this is? Like how there is a value to that and exposing the hypocrisy. I know Andy does a lot of that sort of stuff. Like when you point out this stuff and the fact that people can't tell what's satire and what's real, that actually does make them think about these things a lot. You know what I mean? Like, so that helps. But also in some cases where it's like, there's a running thing of how's Ark Encounter doing? Because it's $100 million boondoggle. But seriously, at some point, no one is keeping track of the numbers, what's the attendance, how much money are they making? And there actually is a way to get records, which this paleontologist in Kentucky named Dan does a great job of. It's like, I've been doing that running total since that place opened. Is anyone reading that stuff? I don't know.
But I'm glad somebody's on that, because when that place finally goes belly up, I want that sign that's in the gift shop with the serpent and I want it. I want it on my wall. It's so good.
Right? So a lot of it is, here's one thing that does help though, because I've been doing it long enough. If somebody is in a story or there's some situation in a story, there's a good chance it's happened before. And especially with certain people who end up in politics, it's like they were in the news 10 years ago saying something crazy. And I'm guessing people forgot about it. Let's go roll the tape. Let's go back. Let's see what they did. That actually becomes really helpful. There's like a running theme too of like Pat Robertson said something that actually made sense today. Because he's like not a creationist and he's pro marijuana. And it's the weirdest combination of a Pat Robertson conservative Christian type. But it's like, no, I swear, he's been right about like 4 things. Go back to 2007 and you'll see. So, I mean, it's an amusing way to keep track of this stuff too. And also, like, it really does give me some grounding into this stuff matters to me. This is stuff I care about. And if I care about it, maybe somebody out there cares about it too. And again, any blogger will tell you, like, some stuff goes viral, stuff you work on for a long time never does.
Yeah.
But again, hopefully people find it valuable. And it certainly has helped me come to grips with how I think about atheism too, because I used to think like getting people to stop believing in God was kind of the end all be all of my activism, because that was the head of the irrationality monster. So if I can get you to stop believing in God, everything else will come down too. And that has really changed a lot, where it's like, no, I know too many dumb atheists to believe that. and I work with too many really smart, progressive, religious people too, where it's like, okay, I do think you're wrong about the God thing, but our values are like 90% overlapping. So like, why am I making you my enemy here? You're not. Like, we just disagree. But again, if anyone who reads my stuff, like, I don't debate God. I don't talk about God's existence. I'm just saying, look, this is where I'm coming from. Here's the story. Here's the news story. Here's my commentary on it. If you agree, great. If you don't, I don't care. I don't pay attention. But that's kind of it. I'm just putting it out there. And maybe if someone likes it because they happen to have the same mindset, they'll find it valuable.
Right.
Well, I think the argument against God stuff was very important for a good decade or so while the atheist community, while the non-religious community was expanding super fast. I totally
agree. And I don't know if I don't know how old everyone is, but like when I was in high school, the only resources available were like a couple books about atheism, which were very academic, and like shady AOL chat rooms. And that was it. And so it's like there were really no good. There were other resources, I should say. There were magazines and organizations, none of which I knew about. So it's like, okay, there's very little out there. Then you're right, Jack. Like, those resources did come out. Those books did come out. And there's good and bad about all of those people and all of those books and stuff. But it's like, if I'm looking for resources now, there are so many good debates on YouTube. There's so many books and blogs and podcasts and YouTubers like who are really good at talking about all the God stuff. It's out there. Like, there are always people who can reinvent it, do it better, do it in their voice. That's awesome. Yeah. But like, those resources are there. So to me, the question is like, there's really no need for me to try to just find new ways of telling people God doesn't exist or do it in my own voice. It's what else can I add to this? And it's let me tell you how this stuff affects me or how I think it ought to affect you. Which is kind of, if I write about stuff, that's the thing I'm thinking about.
So during the pandemic, a lot of kids are home all the time. And we talked in our last conversation back in 2018, you were talking about giving children a sense of numbers at an early age.
Yeah.
Are there any strategies that you have that you're using with your children? And maybe this will be useful for those of us who have young kids or people who have grandchildren. Are there certain techniques that you are doing to give your kids a sense of numbers?
God, I wish I had a better answer. I should have a better answer. And the answer is no, we're just trying to like get the iPad away from them at any time. Because pandemic. It's a lot of just talking about math. They're not like old enough yet to do anything really, but it is a lot of let's talk through some number stuff, or like, do you know this shortcut and stuff like that to add stuff and basic addition, basic subtraction. My kids are not old enough where I feel like I can enforce a lot of those numeracy strategies that I probably have mentioned in the past. I remember that a few years ago, one of the things that would come up is people got really pissed off anytime they saw like new math or Common Core math, which isn't a thing, but okay. But they would get pissy about all that stuff. And they're like, I learned the fast way to do multiplication and they're doing it slowly because they're dumb. And the argument I was trying to make is, no, that strategy that you're seeing someone do on YouTube is actually a better way to think about these numbers. And if you, it's the analogy I could give you is, how do you type? I don't type with my fingers on the right keys, but the thing I learned when I was learning to type, I can go really fast just going like this. Like I will out type anybody at that rate. But when I was learning how to type, I remember them saying, like, if you learn with your fingers on the home keys, it will go slowly at first, but then you'll be able to go really fast down the line once you know how to do it right, because they're teaching you the best practices. And that's kind of how I felt with those Common Core numeracy things, where it's like, oh, they're teaching you the way smart math kids always think about this stuff. But the people who don't do well at math, like, they just remember the algorithm and they just do it. And like, it'll work, but you got to do it right and you can't make any mistakes. And you just got to do it the long way. Whereas the smart math kids are like, oh no, I'll just round this and move some numbers around, and now I can do it in my head. It's like, yeah, teaching them how to do it that way is good for the long run. And trying to get kids to think that way from an early age when they start learning numbers is a smarter way to do it. But for some reason, that became like a culture war issue. I don't know.
Isn't everything a culture war issue? We haven't even talked about masks. We haven't even talked about masks.
I know.
56 minutes into this show, we haven't talked about masks or vaccines.
Because we don't need to, because we don't have the assumption that anyone's going to be like, what? Science says what about masks and vaccines? I oppose it. Like,
yeah,
okay
nobody on this show is doing that. So it'd be masks. Yes, there we talked about it.
Right. Yeah, I feel very much like Fauci, who's just like, yeah, wear masks. Why wouldn't you? We know enough. Like, stop making this a political thing. Just go do it.
Right. What's the best way to fight tribalism?
Be with the right tribe, which is the worst possible answer.
That was fast and honest. I like that.
I have heard. I've heard so many, because I coach a public speaking thing. So I hear a lot of kids making arguments about, like, get out of your filter bubble, get out of your bubble. We need to do that. And that is a valid point. But one of the solutions is, like, we need to expose ourselves to new ideas. We need to listen to people who disagree with us. And my gut instinct, every time I hear that, and I write this on there, if I'm judging them, it's like, why should I listen to white supremacists? Like, why should I listen to MAGA cultists, whatever? Like, they're not saying anything. Who's against Black Lives Matter? Like, they don't have anything I need to hear. So the tribalism thing is like, no, expose yourself to good ideas. Good ideas can come from anywhere, but, like, no, just because they're on the other side doesn't mean they're worth listening to necessarily. I will say I do try to read, because I come across a lot of stuff. That's my best way of getting information. I do try to read other arguments. Whenever I'm writing something that I think might be controversial, or at least I'm taking a stance on something that is in the news, I always do this blog tip for anyone interested. I do try to see if any Christian or conservative or anyone else has written about the topic already, because I want to make sure, am I covering the things they said? Am I responding to the things they pointed out? Like, if it's an abortion issue or something, like, what is the argument anyone who's for this is making? Because I want to make sure I respond to that.
Sure.
Or if a church pastor said this, like, who's defending this? Who is on the side of this? Do they have any explanation for this? Because at the very least, I have heard their arguments. I can respond to those arguments. And again, I think it's less to me about tribalism and more about making sure your sources of information are places you can rely on, because they are trying to educate you and inform you and maybe stretch the boundaries of what you're comfortable with. But there's a difference between that and hearing people whose entire job is being contrarian no matter what. Like, that's just silly. Whereas there are people who could be like, well, okay, I'm with you on this, but, like, I can hear people saying, I'm progressive, I'm a Democrat, but here's why I think, I don't know, the recent COVID bill is actually bad for us. That's an interesting argument. I want to hear what that person says. But I think what I've found that is more useful is it's not like my tribe is atheists. My tribe are progressive political people. It's more like I have a better sense of, I like listening to this group of people And that's an ever expanding group of people who I know are coming at whatever the issue is from a place of like good faith. And they are trying to grapple with the issues in a way that I find interesting. And sometimes they change my mind. And sometimes I'm like, no, you're totally wrong on this. But that to me is more valuable than just tribalism. These are people who get me thinking about stuff. And I like that. They're not an echo chamber for me, but they're just voices that I tend to trust. And whether that's on Twitter, where a lot of it is an echo chamber, but I have an RSS feed that is all over the place. And I get that content from a lot of different places. So I don't know. Tribalism to me is not just, don't listen to people who already agree with you. It's get sources you can rely on because you know where they're getting the stuff from. You know the work they're putting into it when they're saying stuff. It's not just knee jerk. They've done their research and you can rely on them.
Good. So it's hard to believe that we're already at an hour.
Are we? Yes, we are.
Yeah. Oh, see, there you go. Our last question, and this isn't about plugs or where people can find you online. Is there a question you wanted us to ask you, but we didn't? Was there a topic that you wanted to talk about, but we just didn't get around to?
God, I'm sure there are, and I don't know what they are specifically, but I will say if anyone's watching this and you do have a question, I'm sure they'll have my contact information somewhere, but friendlyatheist.com is me. It's easy to contact me. Feel free to message me, DM me, Twitter, whatever. Happy to chat with some people, maybe, or I'll mute you. One or the other. But it's not hard to find me. So if you have a question, reach out. It's all good.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Hemant, for coming on.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
This is always a pleasure. And everyone who's watching, I'm doing this news roundup show, the Disappointed Cat morning show. That's at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, believe it or not, tomorrow morning. So I hope to see you then. Hemant, once again, thanks.
Thank you guys.
Always a pleasure talking to you.
We'll do it again soon.
Good then.
All right. And it's a live mic for another